Hello and welcome to this recorded webinar from the HCPC. This session is about the revised Standards of Conduct, Performance and Ethics, and it's part of the My HCPC Standards series of recorded webinars, which is designed to support our registrants in meeting the HCPC standards. This year, we're focusing on the revised Standards of Conduct, Performance and Ethics. I'm Fiona Campbell and I'm the HCPC's Professional Liaison Consultant for Scotland. I'm recording this in July 2024, ahead of the revised Standards of Conduct, Performance and Ethics coming into effect on the 1st of September. This is not an e-learning module, so there's no set criteria that you'll be required to learn today. There won't be a certificate of attendance available for this recording, but just a quick reminder that at the HCPC, we don't make certificates mandatory when evidencing CPD. So we'd encourage you to use another means of confirming your engagement and make sure you take time to reflect on today's session. So I'll be presenting some slides throughout the session, which you'll see on screen, and you can use the timestamps in the description below to navigate through to the different topics. So without further ado, let's get into the session. All of the HCPC standards serve to recognise the vital role of our registrants in the provision of safe and effective health and care services. So let's remind ourselves of the full suite of standards. Essentially, there are four main sets of standards. The standards of education and training, so these set out what education and training programmes must do to prepare students for professional practice. The standards of proficiency, which outline the essential knowledge, skills and attributes that our registrants must have when they begin practising their professions. The standards of proficiency for biomedical scientists are shown on screen here, but of course standards of proficiency exist for all of the individual professional groups that we regulate. The standards of conduct, performance and ethics, which we're discussing today, so these standards set out how a registrant is expected to conduct themselves, and these standards have been revised and will launch for all registrants without exception from the 1st of September of this year, 2024. And last, but by no means least, the standards of continuing professional development and new registration. So these standards set out expectations for how HCPC registrants continue to learn and develop throughout their careers. It's these last three sets of standards shown on screen here that HCPC registrants need to engage with in their practice throughout their careers in order to maintain their professional registration. So that's the standards of proficiency, the standards of conduct, performance and ethics, and the standards for CPD. So let's focus in now on the standards of conduct, performance and ethics. I'll provide a broad outline of these to help you recognise and understand the many and varied revisions that now feature within them. And it's fully intended that this session should be accompanied by some detailed reading of the revised standards by everyone watching. So links to these standards and other helpful material are provided in the description box below this video. I really hope that everyone will find a few actions based on today's session. So perhaps you'll find some things that you'd like to consider in more detail relevant to your practice, and maybe you would like to share some of the knowledge you've gleaned today with your colleagues, teams, or indeed your wider professional networks. And perhaps you'd like to do some more learning with us and may choose to watch some of our other recorded webinars on some of these standards. Either way, I hope you enjoy this whistle-stop tour of all of these really important revisions. The standards of conduct, performance and ethics belong to you as registrants of the HCPC. So these standards act as a really high-level ethical framework for practice within which all registrants require to work. So at the HCPC, our starting point is one of recognition and respect for the large numbers of our registrants who are demonstrating really outstanding levels of ethical practice fully embedded in their clinical work. For everyone, the standards can be used though to support reflection. They can allow us to refocus and perhaps improve some aspects of the way we work throughout our careers. We shouldn't forget though that these standards also belong to another important group of people, and that's the public. So they outline very clearly what the public can reasonably expect from their HCPC registered health and care professional. Thus, the HCPC requires to use these standards in two main ways, really, to help us make decisions about the people who apply to join our register and to help us make decisions about a registrant's practice when someone raises a concern. It's important to say that these standards are not prescriptive, so how to meet them and what is and is not appropriate will depend on the circumstances of your individual practice and the context in which you are working. So you have the autonomy and flexibility to practice in the way that you need to. You'll always require your professional judgment to assess what is safe and effective practice in the context in which you are working. There are 10 main standards of conduct, performance and ethics at present, and those 10 standards may be familiar to you in your practice and are listed on screen here. The revision process has not removed any of these standards. We also have not added any additional overarching standards, so 10 overall standards remain in the revised version. Instead, there have been a range of changes to the content of some of these standards. It may be reassuring to know that some of the standards, of course, have not changed at all in this revision process, and the standards that haven't received any changes are listed on screen here. Those are Standard 4, about delegating appropriately, Standard 5, about respecting confidentiality, Standard 9, about honesty and trustworthiness, and Standard 10, around keeping records of your work. This is because you and other people told us that they are appropriate and suitably forward-looking in a variety of contexts, and that they remain ultimately fit for purpose. So let's explore the standards that have been revised. These are listed on screen here. And overall, the revisions that have been made have sought to either provide simplification of the standard or improve the clarity of the standard, sometimes how specific the standard is. The changes have also introduced more active language to the standard to demonstrate what actions a registrant needs to take. Some changes and some revisions have expanded the standard to support emergent themes that are relevant to modern day healthcare. So let's go through these changes in a little more detail. Standard 1 is your standard for promoting and protecting the interests of service users and carers, and this standard continues to have 4 main parts to it. It has standards on treating service users and carers with respect. It has a standard on making sure you have consent. Standards exist in this on challenging discrimination, and standards on maintaining appropriate boundaries. And all parts of this standard have been revised to different extents. The standards on treating service users and carers with respect now have active and clear wording around a registrant's requirement to empower and enable service users. And they also outline a registrant's role in supporting people who use your service to make informed decisions. So your revised standard around ensuring consent makes it clear that for consent to be valid, it must be voluntary and informed. So the standard now refers clearly to ensuring the person has the capacity to consent. We know that there is great practice going on around consent across many registrants. However, as consent is central to safe and effective healthcare, these HCPC standards have now elevated the finer details of that. Standard 1's section on challenging discrimination has been strengthened across all areas. And it's important to say that we've always required that registrants must not discriminate against service users, carers or colleagues, or allow your personal views to affect your professional relationships or the care and treatment that you provide. There is no space, of course, for discrimination in healthcare, and the adverse outcomes for service users and colleagues are widely available in the research evidence. With that in mind, we've now added an explicit requirement to treat people fairly. So research tells us that biases have the potential to seriously impact the quality, consistency and accuracy of decision making in health and care professionals. So we now require registrants to be aware of the potential impact of your own personal values, biases and beliefs on the care that you're providing. And we ask you to be aware of this in your interactions with colleagues too. In addition, this standard now asks registrants to raise concerns about colleagues if they think they are discriminating against service users or others, including other colleagues. So this will require registrants to know and understand the relevant procedures within their practice to raise concerns about discrimination. We recognise that these situations can be challenging and stressful, but having this requirement in the standards is intended to be a support to you. You may find it helpful to watch our recorded webinar called Getting It Right When Things Go Wrong for more information and support around this. Also in Standard 1 are your brand new standards around maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. We've responded to requests from registrants to provide much more clarity and detail around what we expect in terms of the responsibilities for maintaining appropriate boundaries. So we've included much more active language in this section, and we've introduced a requirement for registrants to consider the potential impact of their position of power and trust when in social or personal settings, as well as the workplace. In Standard 1, there are 5 new standards now for maintaining professional boundaries. Standard 1.8 requires you to consider the potential impact that the position of power and trust you hold as a health and care professional may have on individuals when in social or personal settings. Standard 1.9 states that you must take action to set and maintain appropriate professional boundaries with service users and/or carers and colleagues. Standard 1.10 requires registrants to use appropriate methods of communication to provide care and other services related to your practice. Standard 1.11 states that you must ensure that existing personal relationships do not impact on your professional decisions. And Standard 1.12 states that registrants must not abuse their position as a health and care practitioner to pursue any personal, sexual, emotional or financial relationships with service users and/or carers or colleagues. Moving on to Standard 2. Standard 2 is your standard on communicating appropriately and effectively. So we recognise that the way in which we communicate has evolved significantly. So there are several updates to the standard to be aware of. So Standard 2 continues to have 3 main parts to it. It has standards on communicating with service users and carers. It has standards on working with colleagues, and it has standards on social media and networking sites. The revisions to Standard 2 take into account that many HCPC registrants are navigating working lives in really complex healthcare systems. So we ask registrants to focus on communicating responsibly, regardless of who they're communicating with and how they are communicating. So in terms of service users and carers, we've strengthened our requirement to support people's language and communication needs by asking registrants to take practical steps to meet these needs. Of course, this also better reflects statutory principles to meet people's needs. In terms of communicating with colleagues, there are now 4 standards that apply. The standards have always required that registrants work in partnership with colleagues to share knowledge, skills, experience and information for the benefit of service users and carers. We've added 2 new standards in this section which cover treating colleagues in a professional manner. At the HCPC, we want to show our support for positive working cultures and professional relationships between colleagues. So your standards now act as an important reminder to all registrants that your opportunities to demonstrate professional behaviour are present in the backstage interactions we have with our colleagues and professionals, just as much, and sometimes if not more, than our opportunities to do so with our patients and service users. So these standards now emphasise the central importance of demonstrating the hallmarks of professionalism in all of these interactions. These new standards now say that registrants must treat their colleagues in a professional manner, showing them respect and consideration. Also, Standard 2.9 states that you must use all forms of communication with colleagues and other health and care professionals responsibly, including media sharing networks and social networking sites. Following on from that, Standard 2 goes on to introduce some new and revised requirements for registrants around social media. The HCPC recognises the enormous growth in social media in recent years and all the benefits this brings. But of course there are challenges, including but not limited to the proliferation of misinformation, which does have the potential to undermine public safety. and the reputation of the professions that we regulate. So at the HCPC, we needed to ensure that this was better reflected in our standards. So we now require registrants to make reasonable checks to ensure information they share on social media and networking sites is accurate and does not mislead the public. We remind healthcare professionals of the position of trust and power so often associated with us as healthcare professionals. So we've also added in a new standard which requires registrants to use social media responsibly and be considerate of professional boundaries and confidentiality at all times. So we encourage registrants to access our updated guidance on social media, a link to which is provided in the description box below this video. And you may also find it helpful to watch our recorded webinar on this topic called The Challenges and Opportunities of Social Media. Standard 3 is your standard focused on working within the limits of your knowledge and skills. And as it is, Standard 3 already requires you to practice only in the areas where you have the appropriate knowledge, skills and experience. The revised standard provides clarity for those wishing to widen their scope of practice. So from September 2024, the standards more explicitly recognise that your scope of practice develops over time, and the standards provide support to registrants who wish to transition to a wider scope of practice whilst ensuring that they are practising safely and effectively. So we've also provided some information around referring service users to other practitioners and added an explicit requirement to clarify that the person being referred to must hold the appropriate knowledge, skills and experience to meet the service user's needs safely and effectively. On this topic, you may find it helpful to access our recorded webinar on Standard 3 called Scope of Practice. It's important to note that in Standard 3 there is no change to the individual standards on registrants maintaining and developing their knowledge and skills. Moving on, Standard 6 is your standard that focuses on the management of risk. This standard has two subsections. It has standards on identifying and minimising risk and standards on managing your own health. There are no changes to the standards on identifying and minimising risk. So registrants are still required to take all reasonable steps to reduce risk to service users, carers and colleagues. Registrants remain required to avoid doing or allowing someone else to do anything that would put anyone's health and safety at an unacceptable risk. However, we have made some changes to the section on managing your own health, and in making these changes we are seeking to better support registrants with health conditions and disabilities. So in the standards we have clarified that registrants do not need to stop practising simply because they have a physical or mental health condition. So it's only where a health condition would detrimentally impact a registrant's ability to practice safely or effectively that they would need to adjust their practice. And if that is not possible, the person would need to stop practising and at that point let the HCPC know. In the revised Standard 6, we have explicitly recognised that registrants may not have capacity to assess their own health. So we've introduced an option for registrants to ask an appropriate health and care professional to make an assessment on their behalf. Moving on, Standard 7 is your standard that focuses on reporting concerns about safety. Standard 7 has two main sections. It has standards on reporting concerns and standards on following up concerns. And this standard goes largely unchanged with the exception of one vital addition. The HCPC recognises the detrimental impact of bullying and harassment on people who experience it. So put simply, this just cannot be tolerated in modern day healthcare due to the significant unfavourable consequences on everyone, including our patients and service users. The revised standards ask registrants to speak up if you witness bullying, harassment or intimidation of a service user, their carer or another colleague by following local procedure. We recognise that so many of our registrants are actively integrated with others and are working to improve multi-professional dimensions of high quality, safe care. Calling out bullying and harassment is a vital aspect of that safety culture for everyone. That said, at the HCPC, we recognise that there are many challenges our registrants face in raising concerns. And in preparation for the revised standards, we urge registrants to reconnect with local policies, local procedures and learning resources for speaking up. In terms of our support to you, you may find it helpful to watch our recorded webinar called Getting It Right When Things Go Wrong. Standard 8 is all about being open when things go wrong. You might hear this sometimes referred to as the duty of candour. It's our final standard to have undergone some revisions in the forthcoming changes to the standard of conduct, performance and ethics. And we want to support our registrants better, so the revisions in the standard set out a process for registrants to follow when things go wrong. This better aligns with our guidance and it gives registrants much clearer steps to follow at a time that we recognise is often quite challenging and also stressful. So these steps include things such as alerting your employer of what's gone wrong and following relevant internal procedures, informing service users and or where appropriate their carer, providing service users or their carer with detailed explanation of the circumstances in which things have gone wrong and the likely impact, and taking action to correct the mistake where possible and detailing this action to the service user and or where appropriate their carer. And as part of this, registrants will need to really know and understand their employer's internal procedures. In the revised standards, we've separated out the requirement to apologise to service users and or their carer, because this better highlights the centrality of apologising when things go wrong. It also recognises apologising as a professional duty for all registrants. So you may find it helpful to watch our recorded webinar called Getting It Right When Things Go Wrong to hear much more about this as we explore the duty of candour in this particular recording. As we move towards the end of our session today, I want to reiterate that the revisions to these standards are based on what registrants, you, and the public told us needed to be in there. So they've been written with the absolute recognition that the majority of HCPC registrants will already be delivering care that meets the highest of these professional standards, very often in quite complex and multi-layered health and care systems. And for so many of you, these standards may simply act as a prompt to stop and reflect, to consider some things a bit differently and perhaps engage in some learning and discussion. If you feel like the revisions might pose some difficulty for you in your practice or the practice of others, then please do connect with your employer or your professional networks for some early support. Personally, I'd like to encourage everyone to identify some further learning that you'd like to do to prepare for the launch of the revised Standards of Conduct, Performance and Ethics on the 1st of September. So perhaps you find something you'd like to consider in more detail that feels particularly relevant to your practice. Whatever you choose to do, we simply request that you share your knowledge from today's session with others and support us to spread some awareness of the revised standards. We urge you to share within your teams, with multi-professional colleagues and other professional networks. So that sums it up for this session today. In this series, we cover other subjects relating to the revised Standards of Conduct, Performance and Ethics, and we'll have links to those in the description below this video. If you want more information on the revised Standard of Conduct, Performance and Ethics, then please do check out our website where you can view the revisions, explanations and much more. You'll also be able to view future events which you can attend live. Here at the Professional Liaison Service, we do much more than these webinars online, so we can also arrange face-to-face sessions at your place of work in all 4 nations. And we cover a range of topics which you can check out using this QR code. So do get in touch using our Professional Liaison email address on screen here to discuss what we can do for you. Thank you for your time today.